Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Trump Goes Nuclear on Harvard, $2 billion frozen in woke showdown. The Trump administration has launched a massive federal offensive against Harvard, similar to the moves they made against Columbia University. The Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism issued a 5-page directive to Harvard demanding changes across student clubs, admissions, hiring, and governance. It threatened to pull $9 billion in funding if they don't comply. And they're serious. The purpose of this task force is to break the will of these universities that have been violating the law, from DEI to the anti-Semitism issues to the discrimination on campus, the trans in sports, the whole thing. You see what the government now is doing with world trade? They're doing that to the universities. It's the same game plan. Harvard President Alan Garber initially sought to cooperate and try to see if he could make a deal with them. But he reversed course after the full list of demands arrived. He vowed not to surrender independence or constitutional rights. And this is coming up in this debate quite a bit, like, how could you force these private universities to take these actions? The answer is because the money that you provide in grants and contracts is not an entitlement. This isn't something where you're giving people something for doing nothing in exchange. There are always conditions that are subject to the receipt of grants, especially when you get into the billions of dollars. Even in the millions of dollars, it's kind of a lot. In the billions, come on. You know you've got to cooperate and you've got to function within the standards of the government. The issue is the universities have become like this breakaway civilization where they make up their own rules and they do their own things and they expect us to pay for it. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. Once Harvard pushed back, the federal government retaliated by freezing $2.2 billion in grants and $60 million in contracts. This money includes Harvard-affiliated hospitals and research programs. Scholars are calling the demands authoritarian and a blatant censorship effort disguised as combating anti-Semitism. Some compared it to ideological purges by Chairman Mao from China. The federal task force wants to force viewpoint diversity in every department with external audits and hiring mandates. Units lacking ideological diversity must admit and hire differently. Kirsten Weld, at Harvard, mocked the plan's vagueness and ideological policing, calling it absurd and unenforceable. She stressed the demands make true academic governance impossible. The idea is to scare all of you to the point where you say, okay, we're going to comply, and then just to kind of keep an eye on you. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, and it's going to cause many people to retire and quit, but it's going to change the entire culture. Also, like we've been doing in the federal government with the new administration. It's like doging the universities. The federal government wants to access all admissions and hiring data until at least 2028. This includes mandatory reporting of any international students deemed hostile to American values. Specific departments like Near Eastern languages and the Divinity School were singled out for bias investigations. Professors could be sanctioned for comments deemed anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. This is really aggressive. If it wasn't necessary to completely remake the universities and to get all of the rot and the poison out of them, I would be against this. I would be saying, look, this is pushing too hard. But they've gone really, really too far. And they can't self-police. They can't self-correct. They've even shown that with the Israel and anti-Semitism issue. They've shown that with the DEI issue. You've got to fight them every step of the way. So either pull their funds and get control of these guys, or you have to accept that they're going to be in control and they don't care what happens to American culture. The Trump task force called for massive governance reform, reducing student and untenured faculty power. Critics say the narrative of radical professors at these universities is a culture war myth. Oh, sure, it doesn't exist. Maybe if we just stopped paying all of the radical professors, they would go away and then it would truly become a myth. In the meantime, that's not what they're looking to do. They just don't want to give up control. The administration is also ordering Harvard to ban certain protests, expel student offenders, and shut down DEI programs. A national mask ban on campus protests was also included. John Fansmith of the American Council on Education said these demands redefine what a university even is. He warned both parties should be alarmed by this power grab. Everyone is alarmed by what's happened to these universities, except for the people doing the damage and a small percentage of the U.S. that does want to destroy the American culture. The only way to fix this is to get really extreme and get rid of the bad people and the bad programs. Columbia University initially complied with similar directives but saw no return of its funds. Now, under the threat of a consent decree, Columbia is starting to resist making changes. Okay, then you don't get your $400 million, and you don't get the rest of the $5 billion we otherwise would have given Columbia University. That's just Columbia University, $5 billion. Harvard's resistance is now seen as a test case for all of higher education. If Harvard won't bend, other schools may follow its lead and try to stand up to the federal government. And it's not just Harvard, and it's not just Columbia. The Trump administration has already frozen $1 billion in federal funding to Cornell and $790 million to Northwestern amid investigations into both of those two schools. And you can imagine what those investigations are about. It's the same issues. From inside higher ed, Trump's demands of Harvard escalate his war on higher education. Higher ed leaders and experts say that the Trump administration's harsh list of demands of Harvard gave it no choice but to fight back. This is a negotiating move. You ask for a lot, and sometimes you settle for less. But in the case of what the administration is doing with China and Harvard, it's almost identical. Today, the Trump administration increased the tariffs on China to over 200%, which is almost a ridiculous number. It means they're going to completely disrupt China until they get what they want from them. And they're going to do the same thing to Harvard and the rest of these universities. It's possible that the universities could sue. Maybe they get some success in court, but keep in mind, that would only be for current grants. There's no way to get a court to say, okay, you're going to fund these entities for multiple years without any review from the federal government. You just have to consistently give them money nonstop, even beyond current contracts. That's not going to happen. Harvard doesn't just need this $9 billion. Columbia doesn't just need that $5 billion. They need that money, but they need even more money and more money and more money. And even with the courts, they really have no way to win. The Trump administration shook higher ed last month when it stripped Columbia University of $400 million and demanded the institution put an academic department under review, discipline pro-Palestinian protesters, also pro-Hamas protesters. There are differences, but there are also some similarities, and create an admissions reform plan, among other measures. But the administration's recent demands of Harvard University appear to mark a massive escalation in the federal government's onslaught on higher education. And this is how these things start out as well. You look at the opposition and you say, okay, look, we're not going to blow these guys up. We'll ask for what we need and maybe some extra, which can be negotiated, and let's see how they respond. If they respond aggressively, if they don't cooperate, it's going to get worse for them. The consent decree apparently is what freaked out Columbia University. So they would agree to do certain things, but they didn't really want it to be packaged into a more formalized agreement that way. They were afraid of making certain guarantees and following through on certain guarantees. Even the acting president of Columbia resigned because the pressure was too great during this process. But the bottom line is, if you don't get what you want by trying to be nice and thoughtful of the other people and the other party, then you're just going to have to blow them up if you have the leverage to do it. That's what the administration is doing. In a letter to Harvard, the Joint Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism insisted on a litany of detailed changes at the university to address alleged anti-Semitism and civil rights violations, including new policies on what student clubs can exist and a federal audit of students, professors, and administrators' viewpoint diversity, showing that they're not just all one-sided with, we hate this group of people and everyone here is wrong. It's important that Harvard offers options so they can demonstrate within a department it's not just a one-sided view. They don't like that. The move came after the task force notified Harvard earlier this month that $9 billion in federal funding was under review and issued a much vaguer set of demands, including a review of programs and departments that fuel anti-Semitic harassment, which is to say they want to just have an open conversation with them and have them come to the table with them and say, yeah, okay, we understand. Things have gotten a little bit crazy over here at Harvard. Harvard doesn't want to do that. Students and locals protested, urging Harvard to fight back. Harvard refused, and their refusal sparked an immediate backlash, immediately, within hours. The task force swiftly froze $2.2 billion in multi-year grant funding and $60 million in contracts to the institution. Higher education leaders and scholars say the specificity and severity of the task force threats to Harvard go beyond any of the Trump administration's crackdowns on higher education so far. And that's because Harvard is really the source of all this. If Harvard wasn't doing it, a lot of the other ones wouldn't be doing it as well. They know when they get Harvard in line, the rest will cooperate. Trump is, quote, begging a good question, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters in a press briefing on Tuesday. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? It's $53 billion. And we certainly shouldn't be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists. There are some restrictions on how Harvard can use some of their endowment money. That's an objection that they raised. But it's not that limited. And if they can't fund themselves, fundamentally, if they can't fund themselves, then they can't exist. Unless they can persuade a federal government, I don't know, maybe our federal government, to sponsor them. As it is, most of these universities have so many international students, they could go to other governments and say, hey, why don't you fund us? Why don't you fund our research? They could do that too. But they're going to have to do a lot more of that unless they decide to cooperate with the federal government. The Trump administration called for far-reaching changes to and extensive federal oversight of crucial aspects of the way the university operates, including governance and teaching. Among its most jarring orders, the task force demanded Harvard commission an external party to audit the university's student body, faculty, staff, and leaders for viewpoint diversity, such that each department, field, or teaching unit must be individually viewpoint diverse. So it's not like they're asking for the federal government to send federal people in. They're asking for Harvard to get someone on their own to audit and review what the university is actually doing and to correct problems at the university. Departments found lacking would need to hire a critical mass of new faculty who add viewpoint diversity, according to the task force letter. And any teaching unit without sufficient viewpoint diversity must admit more students who will shift the unit's ideological makeup. Kristen Weld, who does not like to be told what to do, and apparently she does need to be told what to do, is a history professor at Harvard and its president of American Association of Universities Professors chapter. She called the provision comical, noting that it's unclear what a teaching unit is, perhaps a lecture class, or how ideological diversity would be assessed, let alone how the Trump administration's officials are in any position to be reliable enforcers of ideological balance, whatever that means. She knows what it means. She just doesn't want them losing control. And they're going to lose control. I mean, first you lose the money, then you lose control. The task force ordered Harvard to turn over all hiring and admissions data to the federal government for comprehensive audits. Hello, Doge. At least through the end of 2028 to ensure merit-based hiring and admissions processes. Harvard was also told to review its admissions process for international students to avoid enrolling those hostile to the American values and institutions inscribed in the U.S. Constitution and Declaration of Independence. The task force commanded the university to immediately report any foreign student who commits a conduct violation to federal authorities, including the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department. More broadly, the task force raised concerns about the faculty holding undue influence over the institution. It called on the university to make governance reforms, namely reducing the power held by students and untenured faculty, in addition to any faculty or administrators more committed to activism than scholarship. Weld said the idea that students and professors, tenured or otherwise, have outsized control over the university is ridiculous. She noted that Harvard doesn't have a university-wide faculty senate, though it's now developing one. Quote, professors don't have any formal mechanisms by which to participate in governance at the university, nor do students, she said. This vision of the university in which the problem is that radical professors of students have too much power is a culture war fever dream. Adam Scala, a postdoctoral research fellow at Harvard Medical School and a member of the bargaining committee for Harvard Academic Workers, a union for non-tenured track researchers and teachers, said the demands are a cynical weaponization of anti-Semitism, which he described as a scourge we always are fighting. They don't seem to be fighting it that hard at Harvard in particular. That's the major weakness, and that's why they're all getting attacked this way. All of those Palestinian protests and the Hamas protests, threatening all those Jewish students, that's a major weak point. They didn't deal with it really well. They know they didn't deal with it well. If Harvard were smart, they would have gone out, they would have talked to Israel, they would have said, hey, how can we do a better job over here? And tried to figure out, at least get somebody that could support whatever it was they were doing. They didn't actually do that, and they also didn't solve the problem. So now they're getting caught on this, and there's no way for them to talk their way out of this. If you saw the movie Pulp Fiction, you know what I'm talking about. They ain't talking their way out of this one. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.